welcome to the Soccer Coaching Podcast, brought to you in association with our friends at Soccer Coach Weekly, reflecting our shared ambition to help coaches have the most effective, enjoyable and successful coaching journey for them and their players. We hope you enjoyed this episode and thanks for listening. Ray, welcome back to the podcast. How are you?
Yeah, I'm well, Scott. Are you?
Yeah, I'm good. Thanks, mate. I'm very good indeed. We were just saying we both survived a long weekend. Definitely not thriving at the moment. It's all about surviving.
Definitely. Look, I think we all get to a point in the season and we go, "Oh, we love it," but yeah, this needs to wind down now a little bit. You need the break to fall back in love with it. I think sometimes.
You need to miss it, don't you? Exactly that. And I think the players do as well. I think they need to have a little bit of just some time away. But anyway, let's keep it all positive. It's all good. It's what we're here for. But it is the end of a long season. And I'm sure for lots of people now, they probably maybe finished the last league games, or they may have a couple of good games to go, or maybe a cup final or something, which is all brilliant. But built off, I think, our last conversation that we had when we were doing the coach's voice one, and I think one of the last questions we had in, I think was it from Adam, and he had his
Yeah.
boys, didn't he, on the thing, which were fantastic, and it kind of got us thinking about, just the topic of really what player development is, and maybe we get lost a little, well, not get lost, but certainly there's so much in the world of coaching that you can dive into, and it can often take on different forms. But I think often it gets lost in the team stuff more than anything else, which is not unimportant. But even though we know that player development is probably the heart of what we're trying to do, like I don't know how much time I actually spend doing player development. I spend a lot of time doing other stuff, but how much time do I spend developing my players? And I'm probably going to be embarrassed at the end of this conversation to recognise it's probably not nearly as much time as it should be, or as much focus as it should be. So we're going to chat around that if that sounds like an interesting and worthwhile topic.
Yeah, definitely. And I suppose probably the first thing that to say and the first thing that comes to mind is there's definitely an overlap anyway between being an individual in a team sport. There's loads of overlap. I once wrote something along the lines of, and I don't know whether this is true or not, but is being a team player the most important individual skill, for example? So it's really difficult to separate, but I know what you're getting at. We run team sessions, we talk about games and results and the squad, and we deliver coaching points to a group of 16. And whilst you can all call that player development as well, to be fair, it's just when you start to separate it, I guess, from the group, and just a group learning thing. Yeah,
Well,
so I suppose there's a few spots there.
yeah, well, that's quite interesting. The first thing, before we get into the conversation, like you've got to be thinking straight away. Um, I've certainly seen, and if I'm honest, we've certainly have or had players which are very much about themselves. Not bad, in like this, but they're very much about, I'm in it for me. I want to go and get signed. I'm part of this team because I know the team's decent, but I'm not really bothered how they get on. Like, not in a way that they're gonna want us not to do well as a team. Don't get me wrong, but then they're not there for the team. And we've got other players that are literally all about, right, I love the team. I'm there for the team. What can I do for the team? But they can be equally game impactful, can't they? It's not like, it can be quite frustrating, like sometimes, particularly with the ones that maybe aren't quite as team focused, but ultimately they can still, with that obsession to do well, that can still have positivity on the team. It can come with some potential challenges as well. But that, I mean, straight away we're in a bit of a maze there, aren't we? With like, you haven't got to be necessarily be a team player to be impactful as well, right?
Both those things, whether you are egocentric, we would say, or whether you are team centric in terms of your mentality, it's still an individual mentality. You know what I mean? It's still a point of difference between two players, and then you probably have everything in between as well. And to be fair, the other ends of those spectrums completely, we've probably all come across the player who is so egocentric, they're detrimental to the group. Where they think nothing of the group environment, or it feels that way at least. And then you have the other end of the spectrum, I suppose, in a sense where nothing matters so long as they're with their mates and in and around the group and mucking in or whatever the case may be. So yeah, it's complicated. but I think it's those complications which make it really, really interesting as well.
We had this thing. I've covered it, I think, on a podcast previously. In fact, I'm sure we mentioned it before, and it maybe sounds a little bit immature. And I heard someone else do it, but they gave it different names. I can't remember what they gave it. But we basically stole it and rebranded it a little bit. But we call it. We say in the team, there's three types of players. You've got your soldiers, you've got your sheep, and you've got your spies. And the soldiers, those that are kind of there for the team, do everything. They're there for, they'll just turn up. The ones that are just there at it. Good, want to be part of it all. Do the right things. Then you've got the sheep, and they'll kind of follow. Sometimes they'll follow a soldier, and sometimes they'll follow a spy. But as long as you can manage them right, they tend to go with in the right direction. Sometimes, not always. But then you've got your spies. And your spies can be those players that are impactful and they've got presence. And if they're on your side, they're a weapon. But if they don't quite fancy or disrupt others, then they can go against you. And it's managing them sometimes. And I think some of those players are just there for themselves. They're spies. But if you can get them at working for you, then they're an asset. But if they're against you, it can end up being maybe more hazardous or have a negative impact on the team.
Yeah, very much so. And we probably call them mavericks, wouldn't we, in normal day to day? And we can think of those mavericks even in the professional game off the top of our heads, So um Adelterapt
Like
came
a
to mind straight.
Balotelli kind of thing, I'm thinking.
Yeah,
Not necessarily the
yeah.
way they play, but it's more what they bring with them, isn't it? Do you know what I mean? Like they kind of because Maverick on the pitch is great, right? No one's going to stand against your Maradonas or your Gascoignes of this world, are they? Go and be brave. But someone like a Balotelli, I imagine, comes with a bit of Aubameyang or something. There's other quality, right? But you've got to if you've got to get them on batting for your team, right, and on your side. Otherwise, if you lose them, it can be a nightmare.
It's an absolute skill, and it's I think it's a different conversation when like the names you mentioned. I mentioned Adele Trapt a minute ago, and can be wonderful and infuriating almost all at the same time. But with the professional players, pros will normally tell you if you hear the class of '92 talking about Cantona, it was like you do what you want, not you do what you want, but you could be that free spirit, you could be that maverick, you can be that guy because you're slightly different because you've got quality and they've gone on record to say 100 times that like he's won them leagues and he's been the point of difference in games because they indulged his individuality. And Alex Ferguson indulged his individuality, whether that was the team dress, that the suit or the tracksuit or whatever they had to wear, that he was always given that extra leeway. Um, but I think as grown adults, you can understand that a little bit better. And I actually think it's even more difficult in youth football to have that point where you go, well, actually, for example, and I'm being really reductionist here, Jimmy's really good, so he doesn't need to run. So all of you need to run extra. You know what I mean? That doesn't really sit well um, with an understanding, probably from youth players, probably from parents, wouldn't get that either. Um, Nor is it something you might want to promote as a youth coach either. So I always think it's a slightly different conversation whereby maybe if you do have those characters in your youth environment, you are actually, well, this is individual development as well, isn't it? You are actually trying to improve them in that aspect, right? So instead of, you know, Jimmy, you're working on Jimmy's mentality or his work ethic or whatever it might be, whereas you're working with Johnny on his finishing or crossing or defending or 1v1
Yeah,
stuff, the
yeah,
stuff we normally do.
yeah.
And I think that there then comes a crossroads. And I think a lot of those kind of characters, maybe at the end of their teens, when they start dipping into adult environments where maybe they don't have the credit in the bank to behave like that, and can get swallowed up by the older ones, and they kind of reach a pinch point. But it's a really interesting conversation because I don't think there's a silver bullet to solving it.
Yeah. When is
But
there ever?
yeah, indeed.
Well,
There's definitely coaches listening, going, "Yeah, I've got that kid, or I
yeah,
had that kid." Like,
yeah,
everyone has it at some point or other. Um, and you'll probably remember the outlier parts. You probably remember the moments of magic, and then you remember the hold your hair out the arguments or the arguments
yeah,
amongst players.
yeah.
Um,
The
and
disruption.
loads of crossroads as to whether what do we do with this player.
Okay, well, look. the conversation going around player development, and we're going to try, or I'm going to try the best I can to make it about not teams, but talk about actually players, but obviously within teams, because I think that's ultimately, I think that's the crux of it. So how do we do that? So my opening question to you is not too big and too open, but I'm going to try and put it out there. Is to say to you, ask you then, how can I, as a grassroots football coach that coaches a team an hour and a half a week and we play a game at the weekend, how can I ensure that I am developing my players individually?
Hmm.
Yeah, no, that must be a question. How much difference can I genuinely make to individual player development, do you think, first? We can talk about how we go about it in a minute, maybe, but how much difference can I actually make? Is it possible to develop players realistically in that time? And if so, how much difference can I make to them? Bear in mind, I've got 18 players on a weekday evening training with us for an hour and a half, and then we've got the games to get through as well. And whether we like it or not, let's be honest about this, winning games is it is part of what we have to do. We are not there just to develop. We are there to try and win football matches and to win cups, stuff like that. And that's not for my ego. I promise you, that's part of what the team want, the players want, and we wouldn't have the team we have if we didn't want to compete as well. Because the players would go somewhere else. Like they want to win things. We try and keep that in reason. But how do I juggle those or spin those plates and keep the balance? That's not
Yeah.
an unfair first question.
Well, it's quite leading because you probably the easiest answer is you can't do all of it, so let's just do you know what I mean, the bits we can, which is completely it's fine. I think it's possible, but I think you have to be deliberate about it. I think you have to set out to do it, and do it in amongst all those things you spoke about. Um, so if it's on you to run sessions once a week, twice a week with 16 or 20 players, whatever it might be, where it always feels like group management, then we have to find a way to weave it in, essentially. Um, so what I do and what I have done for a long time, and what I've done with coaches who've approached me with stuff like this, like looking for a curriculum and stuff like that, is to underpin. And I'm going to use the word IDP process, and all coaches would go, come on, Ray, that's not going to help me. But that in its simplest form, I truly believe does. Um, and what that involves, like the heavy lifting part probably comes at the beginning, where you have some
Ray, do you
time.
mind just for those listening? I'm sure most have heard about it before. I know what IDP means, but just as a quick summary, code, what is IDP and what's its point, and then we can go into it. So just so we can fill in that black, so we're on the same page.
So individual development plan, sometimes individual development program, sometimes individual learning program, whatever. It all means the same thing. It's a part of your work within your coaching where it is focused purely on the individual. Because when you think about it, I'll hook onto something you said a few minutes ago about the players doing it for themselves or joining because the team is good and they want to go to an academy, or they want to go into the pro game or whatever. The most important parts of that journey for the player are actually the ones where they're sat in an office, more than likely with an academy manager, with the scouts, with a first team manager at a certain level, and it's just them. You know what I mean? And it's like, we will now judge whether you will go on to this next level, right? So there has to be, I believe, um, something built around that where that player can go, okay, I can, within the context of the team and playing within, 10 players and a squad of 20 and all that sort of stuff, there has to be some way that I can get the best out of me, right? And I don't see why that should be a problem. And within winning as well, that's another thing that has kind of become a bit of a dirty term in youth sports. So an IDP process allows us to do that. If we look at individual sports, if you were to sign your kid up to play tennis, right, or rock climbing or golf or whatever it is, you'd probably expect every once in a while for that coach to turn around to you and go, this is where I see little Mary. This is what they're good at. This is where they need to improve. This is where they're at compared to other 11-year-olds, or whatever the case may be. And look, in individual sports that is easier, but I don't think it should mean that as soon as you go into a team sport, that falls off. Do you know what I mean? I feel
Yeah,
like, especially if you are, whether you're an official academy or whether you are a player development center or you are a private academy or whatever it is, certainly if you're promoting yourself as a development club, that's maybe higher along the food chain than other clubs, then I think this part of it is front and center now. So I want
yeah,
to send my kid there because they make players better. How often do you see that banded around? Now, players will get better just playing, and they'll naturally get better for a million reasons. They're growing, they're getting better anyway. Um, they get better with age because the body changes and blah 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 blah. So there's that circumstantial one for sure. But yeah, look, to circle back to the idea, an IDP process would be where you do all your team stuff, but you thread the IDP idea throughout. Okay, so is
yeah.
that explained enough? And
Yeah, 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 yeah.
yeah,
So, but like, and I decided away to this because that's where I'm positioned. And and I think a lot of the coaches that have been around a while that coach in like grassroots space, so we're not getting paid necessarily, we're probably dad's volunteered or or just involved at that level, or we maybe have seen or worked in the academy system, or at least seen it and gone to observe a session or spoke to academy coaches, and so you get a sense of what goes on there, right? And obviously very good coaches, very passionate, doing it for their jobs, and have a setup around them that supports team and particularly individual development because they're not looking to build team in a Cat One Academy. They're looking to get key players out to do things. So great, and we can learn from that. But I guess the trick is how do we then because we're almost on the opposite side of that, aren't we? In the sense of, we are primarily trying to develop a team because that is what grass was about, essentially. Whilst alongside that, trying to help players get better. And I wonder if there's elements we could take from that space where they are very good at developing players and realistically embed it in a grassroots space without it being too much. Because who's going to fill out individual development plans like once a week for 18 players when it's a part-time gig? But is there ways in which we can take some of this stuff away from your experience and understanding where actually there's some simple things here that would help someone like me remember actually, you know what, Scott, great, build the team, good work on that, but how do we get Louis working up front a bit more to do this kind of thing, or do we get a defender defending? How do we do some of that stuff at the same time while we're trying to keep that team spirit going?
well, let me give you the cheat code version of it then, because as I was
Perfect.
saying
That's what we're
earlier,
after.
it's well, yeah, but to be fair, Scott, it's been my role probably in this space over a long time to kind of debug all the complicated stuff that you can see, and you're nodding there because you know from making the ball roll and stuff like that
Well, I'm
that's
obsessed with
that's
your books. Yeah, they talk to me. They keep it simple. I can understand it.
that's literally a USP from my point of view. Is like, how do we make this understandable for the masses? So if I was to ask you, Scott, if we were to go through every single one of your players, you would be able to tell me something they're really good at and something they're really poor at, right?
Yeah,
As a minimum, yeah. And then you'd probably be able
yeah,
to build probably another couple of points around that. So you would end up with without breaking sweat, we would have three or four things. Maybe they're technical things, maybe they're tactical things, maybe they're psychological things, like we spoke about before. Whatever that might be, probably those first three or four things out of your mouth are central to that player's individual development, right? And
yeah,
that can then become the foundation of what we do. Now, let's just expand that a little bit, and let's say that you and your goalkeeper, while everyone else is playing a small sided game with a parent and an assistant coach or whatever you've got around the place, they're all playing a game, and you call out your goalkeeper, and then you call out the centre back, and then you call out little Jimmy the Maverick, and then you call out, and you have a 5 minute conversation, and you were to say, what do you think are your good things and your poor things? What do you want to improve on? And between you, then you end up with a maybe a slightly different three or four things, but you'll have three or four things. And those three or four things, Scott, literally become their IDP. So on Saturday, when you're playing, I don't know, your league fixture, whatever the case may be, and your, let's call it a super strength Scott, your super strength Scott as a left winger is dribbling, driving at defenders. Maybe your role model, you could use role model. Maybe your role model is Rio Ingamoa, right? So when you get the ball, I want you to go at people. That's what you're good at. So I want to see what you're good at. I don't want this, unless you really have to. Let's try not turning back and playing inside. Let's really develop that. Um, but your point, your area for development might be when you lose it or when the team loses, you need to recover quicker earlier, right? And that's you. So on Saturday, when you get the ball out wide 1v1 and you pass it inside, there could be something as small as a piece of eye contact between me and you, and we both know what we're talking about, if that makes sense. So that eye
Yeah.
contact says, could you have gone back? Could you have tried to have a go at him there? Or you literally say the words, "Hey Jimmy, what happened? Oh, I didn't fancy it, or he had some cover, or whatever it might be," and then it's done. And those 5 second conversations or little eye contacts you have a million times over between your games and your training sessions. You know, and and I know you've got a follow up question now, but if you extend that idea across the year, where let's say your little Rio Ingamoa, let's say by Christmas, he's tracking back, he gets it, the penny's dropped, and all that sort of stuff. You might change that area for development. You might change that into another conversation because, again, you've got a small side of games being looked after by someone else, and say, "How do you have my cover? What do you think of your development in that area? Yeah, I get it now. I'm recovering quicker. Okay, so can we now, um, I don't know, back press and win the ball more often. Let's not just run back. Let's see if we can run back and win the ball, and just move the needle a little bit on the same thing. Or it's still not good enough. So why isn't it good enough? How can it be good enough? And we just stay in it. It stays a point that we make throughout. And you've got a few balls in the air. You have
Yeah.
18 of those kind of swirling around your training and match day. Um, but between you and the players, you're in control of it.
Yeah, and I guess you haven't got to monitor all 18 players every match and training session, have you? Like, you can spread that out and maybe focus, different weeks on different players. But I laugh because when you said about, I've got a follow-up question, I've got about 20 follow-up questions. Like, I'm trying to write them down quickly. I'm trying to do it in an order that makes some kind of logical sense. So the first thing I guess you've triggered our thinking around this is, and I think you said it 3 times. The starting point is a conversation, right? It's got to start with the conversation first. So, or like, yeah, I guess it has to, I guess as a coach, I could know I want to have a list out and not have the conversation and just be right. I know I want Jimmy to do this and Billy to do that, and that's it. But if it's to be truly effective, it's probably better to have the conversation with the player first at some point. So on that question, it's would you ask the player where they want to improve? Would you tell them where they should improve? And how important is it that actually you're on the same page there? Because I'm not sure that I think most players are probably in tune with how they are, but it's quite funny when you ask, especially younger players. I'm not talking about 6, 7, but even like 13, 14-year olds, they can have quite a different perception, positive and negative, about their own game compared to how I would see their game. So things that I think are strengths, I think are weaknesses. Something that I think are weaknesses, I think are strengths. So is it important to have that chat first, you think, and then kind of qualify what you might work on?
Yeah, 100%. Like if you can get the biggest ingredient in anything human behavior wise is buy-in. If you can get buy-in from people, then you're halfway there. So it makes a whole lot of sense. It's probably non-negotiable to have the conversation first. But if there are points of difference, and by the way, sometimes players will come back to you with something that you've not even thought of, or something so micro. I remember having a chat with a player in this circumstance, and he was a striker, and he spoke about a specific finish that he had
Right.
trouble when the ball came in low and hard, and it was just so micro that you were like, it's not even on my radar. It seems like it's important to you. Then why not? Why not? Why wouldn't we put it in the pot? And
Yeah.
if there are points of difference between you, then have the conversation. Well, actually, I think it's easier to tell them they're better at something than they believe than it is tell them that you may think they're not so good at what they are. But you can certainly talk about building on, I think I'm really good. Rio Ingramo says I'm really good at recovery runs, and you're thinking, oh, you're really not. Well, let's say, okay, well, if you do 5 out of 10, let's try do 6 out of 10 or 7 out of 10 for the next few weeks, or something like that, where you feel like you're building on those things. Regardless, Scott, if you have those 16 conversations and you have those 16 things in place and they're kind of bubbling below the surface, right? I'm not saying to coaches it's then your responsibility to head count all of those four things because that gets out of hand really quite quickly. What you're
Yeah.
doing is you're co-coaching it effectively with the young player and probably even the parent as well to shine a light at it and go, well, every time you train, I expect you to recover. Every time you play a match on a Saturday, there's an expectation now that you recover. And sometimes when you shine a light on these things, you don't have to juggle all those things.
Yeah.
I mean, I think that's maybe um, a perception of coaching that if it's not going through me, every detail's not going through me, then maybe it doesn't exist. But but it can, and if
Yeah. You
um,
create the environment for it. You create the space for it.
yeah, just the bandwidth for it. So that player who talks about finishing from those low crosses, and it was a really random one, but you go, well, look, on you go, get hold of it. If
Yeah.
I used to, I'll give you a really good example. The goalkeeper um, don't like coming for crosses. Why don't you like coming for crosses? Oh, I got smashed one day, and I find it really difficult. And okay, so what will we do? Um, we can make you a better goalkeeper by staying on your line all the time, or do you think you should make a decision early and go get it? And what we'll do is we'll just like at a corner, we'll just tell your mates that if you're coming, you're going to be loud and early. You might not get it, and that might be a problem, but at least one or two might jump on the line for you. You know what I mean? And suddenly
Yeah.
you've got a shared experience there where I'm now helping you with your IDP on a Saturday because I know it, for example, or Rio on the left hand side, he's one of his things is to take players on 1v1. So if he loses it, then we'll deal with him
Yeah.
losing it because that's part of it. You know what I mean? And it can become a monster without you having to quarterback every single message.
Yeah. Well, I guess so. That links in nice to my next question then. So the first thing we're saying, like it starts probably with a good conversation, and actually having that open chat about what it should be. And it hasn't got to be complicated, it might be just two or three things someone wants to work on. And then you've touched this, I think, just as you've been explaining there's different scenarios. But then the next thing I guess is linking it to some kind of target, isn't it? Some kind of, measurable thing that you can see improvement. But I guess there's a danger of saying to your striker, I want you to go and get like 5 goals in this game, or even just get 10 shots off. But having some kind of way to measure it and, and recognize how you're getting against it in a positive way, I guess that's important too.
It can be. It's the part. To be honest, it's the part I let go of because it's the organic part. Now unless we start to add to our resources, and bearing in mind we're doing this because we lack resources in the first place,
Yeah.
and I can maybe Dad has a tick sheet of when Rio Ingamo, if he listens to this podcast, I'm just using him as an example. I think you recover fine, kid. But that Dad has a tally chart when he does and when he doesn't. Do you know what I mean? And
But
doing
there's a
it that
danger in
way.
there, Ray, just saying that. I know what you think. I know what you mean. But you don't want to make it the thing, do you? You don't want to make it obsessive, do you, in a negative way and become an anchor, do you? And right now I've got to do that. It's got to be. I guess you have to be clever about how you review it and know you're improving, right? Because numbers can be a problem, can't they?
Can it be good enough where um, so if I'm in an E-Triple-P system in the youth development phase, you'll probably have these conversations every 12 weeks, right? And the outcome of these conversations are still going to be three or four things that you need to sort of shine a light on,
Keep
right?
working on. Yeah.
Yeah. Now it might be backed with data, it might have some video, it might have all kind of things holding it up, but ultimately nobody else can remember anything more than three or four things. No one can carry any more than that, let alone children. If you did a performance, someone did a performance review at work, if they were an accountant and you gave them 10 or 12 things that they needed to focus on, they couldn't reel them off. So the really important thing is that the kid knows them, understands them, and can repeat them consistently, and is prompted, let's say, not coached it, but prompted around them consistently. Um, and yeah, with the like, what do you say to strike? The strikers say, "I want to score more goals," and you say, "Okay, go out and score more goals," and then they do, or they don't score more goals, and it's just that's not really built on anything, is it? It might be
Or it
something
comes at the expense of other things, doesn't it? Too much, but actually, then our decision making is gone because you're just thinking about doing that one thing. Um,
we call outcome versus process. So if you only focus on the outcome, so for example, if the goalkeeper says, "I want to keep more clean sheets," you've got a problem because if something flies in the top corner in the first minute from
you can't
30
control it.
yards, you can't control it, and your things out the window, you may as well concede 10, right? Because your performance measure is out the window. What you can do, I believe, is, and it's much better, is to be far looser with those kind of things and be satisfied. So if 12 weeks later we have this secondary conversation, how do you feel this is? I
Yeah.
think that's been much better. I think that still needs working on. And the conversations just remain alive. The problem I think we get into is that we take it so far that the mum or dad with all these kids and trying to win games and trying to wash kit and trying to organize referees and all do that, we come to see it as a chore, and it's the thing that gets dropped off because,
Yeah.
well, you have to do it. Like no one's holding me to account for this. But I bet you, Scott, if people are coming towards the end of the season now, certainly in the UK, but I bet by the time they're up and running in the summer again, if they tried it once and carried it on for next season, they would never go back. They would find their own way of doing it. And the subtle
Yeah.
differences because we all have different whatever. Some coach might get a classroom and you might have a little parent teacher 5 minute meeting schedule set up for everyone. Brilliant. Another might
Yeah.
do it on the side of the pitch while the assistant coach looks after the game. They might split it. They might do whatever. But ultimately, if we could get that, and I use the term bubbling along because I genuinely mean it, so that the river is racing, but the individual part is bubbling along, um, and we just connect with it, yeah, as and when we can.
Well, you made me think again. I'm just thinking about my own, coaching season, and you're so true, like what you said, because I probably spend, and I hate saying this, but I probably spend a lot more time doing things that around getting the team ready for their training and matches that aren't nothing to do with player development. And it's probably that gets sacrificed first, like in my planning stuff, whether that is booking pitches, getting refs organised, talking to parents, just getting a team ready, setting up, like whatever it may be, like that all those minutes, 10 minutes, half hours, like could have been time where I'm actually thinking, okay, what am I going to work on with Billy today? Actually, let's look at his things we agreed 12 weeks ago or 10 weeks ago, and how were they getting on with those? And tonight's about that. And that kind of goes first, doesn't it? The team stuff never doesn't go. The team stuff stays because that's, their team's important. But the individual stuff, that kind of, well, not consciously gets forgotten about, but it's almost the first thing to get sacrificed subconsciously when you've got a limited time and it goes elsewhere.
Absolutely. And look, some of the stuff you mentioned there is has to be done. That's why it stays in. You know what I mean? Like you're booking your pitches and referees and
Yeah.
sort of stuff. Like I'm blue sky thinking it here, but there's a parent, guaranteed there's a parent within your system um, that may pick something like that up, that may have the skill set to do that. If you said, look, I need an hour a week and it's just to take some lag off what I'm doing
Yeah.
so that I can better spend that time
Yeah.
elsewhere. And we all feel like we're expected to do it all. Do you know what I mean? And
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
you can't get away from it for sure. But is that the part we really want to drop? is the individual
Exactly.
part.
Best use of time, right, isn't it? You use your strengths where you can make most contribution to the team and the players, right? So, yeah, yeah.
At least
Maybe
Scott
that's one answer.
at least Scott doing it kind of in a way I suggested. Now that's just an idea, and everyone else will translate that idea into something. Hopefully that could work for them. But by just facilitating a conversation and then letting the players take, we talk about players taking control of their development all the time. That's a great way of doing it. Do you know what I
Yeah,
mean? And um, give yourself, and end of the game, there's the whiteboard on the marker. Give yourself an IDP score out of 10. Do you know what I
yeah,
mean? Just and age 7. Why is it a 7? Oh, because why is it a 4? Oh, you know, I felt lazy today. I didn't run back. Whatever it might be, but just keep it there. Keep it central. Um, and if you had those conversations, I would suggest how many conversations would you think you could do with that over a season? 3, 4? You did it at one at the beginning, one halfway, one at the end, and then kind of the normal coachy input that we have,
yeah,
throughout. Um, role models are massive, because they can go home, they can watch YouTube clips of um, whatever player who's their role model
yeah,
going 1v1 or making that save or coming for that cross or taking that chance or striker's movement or whatever the
yeah,
case may be, you know. Um, and all you've done really is pull the strings.
yeah. All right, so I think this is working out nicely. So the first we spoke about was conversations. Then we moved on to talk about targets and how they may or may not look. And then I think the third thing that I noted when your first talk about this was really then you talk about really about challenges, I guess, and about clever ways in which maybe we could take a team, say training session or a match, and actually you could put individual challenge in there. So you've got players working their individual parts to it within the game context. I think that's what you were kind of suggesting. And is that another way then approaching player development individually, but in part of a team environment?
If I would suggest, if you get the first bits that you spoke about, if you can get them in place, whereby Scott knows his 3 or 4 things, then those 3 or 4 things they don't they don't go anywhere. They stay all the time. So okay, there might be a drill in your training session where I don't get to dribble. Okay, but there'll be a small sided game where I'll play, and I'll play every Saturday, and I can attempt to dribble 1v1 every Saturday. You know what I mean? So they can. The problem might be the repetition of that, but at least you're getting focused attention on certain things for the individual. Now, what we as coaches like to do is we like to box it off quite nicely. So I'm going to do Jimmy, Johnny, and Mickey on Tuesday night about their IDP, and then I'm going to do the other 3 next week. And by the time you got halfway there, you're ready to blow your brains out because Mickey missed the right. Mickey missed
Yeah,
the first session, so what am I going to
yeah,
do with him? And little Scott at the end turns around and goes, "Oh, you haven't done one for me yet. Oh, I didn't put one on the list."
yeah,
And right, the the best small sided game I've ever run is, and we're all used to putting constraints or conditions on a small sided game. So 6 versus 6, you score this way. 6 versus 6, you must do this before this, or whatever the case may be, right? We do that all the time. Well, here you are, 6v6 IDP night, right? So if you're, I'm trying to think of the first example that came to my head was a striker years ago who he had a really untidy first touch. So we put him on 2 touches in a small sided game. Him, not everybody, him. And it was so when the ball came up to him, there was a real kind of shine a light on that first touch because you've only got a second touch to do something with it, right? And that's just him. The guy marking him would have had something else, and each and every player, based on their IDP, would have had their thing. So instead of one constraint or one condition on the game, you actually have in a 6v6, you would have 12. All right, my goalkeeper needs to come for more crosses. So the first thing we'll restart from corner kicks, right, to the opposition, right, and we'll just let him come through bodies and punch or catch, whatever the case may be.
yeah,
And just get a little bit creative around because we're really good at those condition games, really good at them. And we could have a whole episode, couldn't we, of people phoning in saying my favorite game is this, my favorite game is that. Having a situation, and you can't do that bit, you can't get to that crescendo bit without the kind of paddle work below. Do you know what I mean? Like without those conversations, without those really organic things. Um, but whether you have that condition game where everyone's got a little role to play, a little different thing going on, um, we can organize that. We can tell players this is an IDP game, or every session and every game can be a team game, a winning game, an IDP game, a league game. It can be. Do you understand where I'm coming from? Like you'll do
I
as a
love that.
footballer, you'll do 100 things in a game, from a micro first touch to a turn to whatever technical. You'll defend, you'll attack, you'll transition, you'll foul, you'll fall, you'll roll over, you'll I don't know, smash into someone, you'll do physical stuff, your mentality will be all over the place. You'll do 100 things. But you know what? It's just those 3 or 4 things that we're going to zoom in on a given moment, that that keep you developing.
I love that. I guess like if you're going to plan your session out with your coaching a topic or you're coaching your principles, wherever it's going to be. So you can have that, but wrap within that, you've got your individual players' targets, well, review or their plans that they can execute. There's 2 or 3 things they need to work on, and there may be some topics or there may be some principles that lend themselves better to certain aspects of those, which is fine. But ultimately, really, if one of the 3 aren't in there, why is it there? I guess is the question for each of the players, but it's going to be in there. But they're working on their own individual stuff as well as a team working on its whole thing, which actually isn't, you wouldn't necessarily even know that it was happening unless you knew it was happening, kind of thing. I think that's brilliant, and it's a great way to make sure, as the coach, you're not putting it all on you. The players will know their targets. They'll know what the game is, and they might have a condition, like you said, an individual condition to go with the whole thing. But what a great way of kind of spinning those plates without having to do everything, overly complicated.
Really, and that's a central point of it. As soon as it becomes the monster, take the step back and go, you know, if that I don't know, that passing exercise you really love doesn't hit all your 3 things, and that's just something we let go of. You know what I mean? Or better still, we start to do more things that involve more things, and then we start talking about game-based training and all that sort of stuff. That's definitely a different conversation. There's very little. There's very little you can't coach in a small-sided game.
Yeah,
In fact, there's probably nothing you can't coach in a small-sided game. Maybe heading doesn't really come out, but that's
yeah,
not really something that youth coaches are going to be too
yeah. It's not the
frantic
priority
about.
out there, is it? No.
So
Okay. Okay, I'm just thinking now if that's okay. So my next bit's kind of like again, it's all about me, but I'm gonna try and make it sound like I'm not an awful coach that wants to win at all costs by saying this. What do you do if Okay, what's your view on player development? Do you focus on enhancing the player's strengths and getting them super strong, or do you focus on where they're not so strong? So, for example, let's imagine you've got a centre forward, a striker that's brilliant, like running in behind, and creating havoc, powerful, fast forward. It maybe isn't as used to or experienced at holding up the play and sharing the ball or playing off 1 or 2 touches. They want it in behind. So, you know, as a team, bang straight behind and we got good chances to score. But playing off that centre forward is maybe not quite the same thing. Do we just focus on that super strength and that's it? Do we develop the other aspects of that?
yes,
And if we are going to develop the other aspects of that, how do we do that in a game environment without giving up games? And
look,
that's just an example.
that's there's loads of stuff in there to go to the crux of it. For me, the main 2 things in there have to be developing what he's good at, he or she is good at. That the super strength part of it. That's for me. That is Mo Salah doing finishing after training every day, right? Because he doesn't need it, but you know what I mean. He's David Beckham practicing free kicks on a day in day out basis.
Is it an age and stage thing then, Ray? Maybe that's fair to qualify that. Is this the same for under eights? Is for under 18s, or do we say actually under eights? Maybe you do a bit more of everything. Under 18s, you focus on super strength, or actually, are we saying when we recognise super strength, we should focus on that?
Yeah,
what
maybe. And
everyone
like the thing is, when you go and cold and hard rules, it becomes really difficult. But uh, to sort of bleed back to the question around the super strength bit, the all players have the thing they're really good at, right? And all people love when people shine a light on the stuff they're good at, right? The
yeah,
last thing you want is to get bogged down in an environment where every conversation is you need to get better at
you need
that,
to
you
get
need to
better.
prove,
Yeah,
right? So if the super strength part becomes the first part of the conversation, I think it makes for an easier conversation, right? Because it puts that front and center. And every player will, some players will, lap up the super strength stuff. Some players will see through it and go, I don't want to talk about my strengths. You've had them before. I want to talk about this because I'm really rubbish at this and I really want to get to it, right? So you have your super strength, and then you have the second part, and this is so open to interpretation, but the area for development, the main area for development, should be something relevant, right? So re-ask the question. I've got a striker who's super strength is running in behind and scoring goals. So you're talking about Jamie Vardy, right? So am I going to put the most important thing in his development program being his super strength running in behind, or am I going to put it for his hold up play? It doesn't really ring through if both of those go together, if that makes sense.
yeah,
I hope it does. So personally, I might let go of that second one, or you might drop it in at number three and number four and go, those moments where it's not available to run in behind. When you come to feast, can you look after it, or whatever the case may be, and just kind of bubble that along with it, or something like
yeah,
that. But the super strength should be that running in behind to make a difference, in my
yeah,
eyes. We also got to be very careful. You've seen if people Google IDP on the back of this podcast, you'll probably find a form of some sort that could have 50 or 60 different technical or tactical things on there. Everything from first touch to heading to defending and transitioning and everything. And when you think about it, if I'm that, um, let me think of a really good example. If I'm the centre half, should my IDP contain, but I'm really bad at finishing or crossing? My IDP shouldn't contain
to be
that, should
player
it?
position specific, right? Or role specific, right? What's the role I'm supposed to be doing, and measure me against the role, right?
Or archetype, or maybe it's measured against, like, your 8 year olds are different again, because what do you want from 8 year olds? You want them to be able to move really well, and you want them to be able to handle the ball. Like that's what you want from an 8 year old. And that, these things are age specific as well. So let's be really clear about this. The striker you have to run in behind when they're eight, that you don't have a striker who's running in behind. You have a footballer that's got a certain kind of makeup early. Needs to be good with the ball and needs to be able to be, when I say be able to move, have a good range of movement, like their ABCs and things like that. For me, if you get players to the end of the foundation phase, with that as front and center of everything, I think you're, tick tick done.
Yeah,
Um, but yeah, again, you wouldn't have crossing in your centre backs one, or finishing per se. Don't kick them out of the finishing practices, because that's not what we're trying to say. But the case may be is, just because in one of those tick boxes it says their crossing is really bad, doesn't mean it needs to be developed either. You know.
yeah, yeah. And so great points. And I'm trying to make it an honest conversation in the sense of the reality here. So a a large part of the player development in youth football is going to be match day experience, isn't it? Like it is. Like so for all the training sessions in the world, you're going to play any games, and the kids like to play any games. Again, I'm talking grassroots space, I'm talking kind of not the littlest ones or the older ones, something in between there where they're in that weird place where they want to win but they're still developing and all that kind of stuff. How can I make sure that on a match day I'm still maintaining that player development opportunity for matches? Um, and not getting too obsessed or focused on the results of a game. And I know I shouldn't be. I do understand that. but there is a there is a responsibility to remain competitive, I guess. Let's even forget about winning, but I've got a job to remain competitive against you for everyone's sake because we're in leagues. How can I use those games as development opportunities, or is there a danger that I'm going to make us less competitive and therefore I'm selling either the competition short or our team short? Should I be focusing on cups to be the one where we take it serious and the league games are more like for development or vice versa? How could I approach that competitive space to still do the right thing?
I would honestly try to find, like, if you say to a coach, "Oh, we'll use the cups to go and win," and then what does that make the league games in? What does it make them? And if we say it's about development, are we automatically saying that winning doesn't play any part in that? Chances are, when you put a team out on a Saturday, each and every one of them wants to win, yourself included. You fast forward 2 hours, you want to be driving out of that car park having won the game and played well. I think all of us would say that. I don't think there's too many coaches who would legitimately say that I'd prefer not to. Maybe there are certain circumstances, to be fair, but very, very rare would you say I'd prefer to lose today to win, unless there was a wider message to send. Now, can we, instead of treating them as opposite things, like as if one can't? It's like the argument in the professional game. If you play out from the goalkeeper, you can't win. It's like anti-winning somehow. It's like you're playing with your chances of winning, and I think time and time again, for example, that's been shown that that's not the case. Yeah, you might, Man United on Sunday, you might give up a goal doing it, but the money in the bank you have over time from doing it is better than not, right?
Yeah,
And unfortunately, you just have to have that moment at some point because it's just, the weight of averages or whatever. So if you're going into those games and you have all of your players on a program and you are competitive and you set out your team to win, I would hope there's certain things around game time that coaches and leagues would have certain rules around game time which constrain us to make sure that players are on the pitch for whether that's equal, whether that's half a game, whatever that looks like. If you're in a league that doesn't have that, consider constraining yourself to a minimum amount of game time for each player. Because otherwise, player number 16 on your list, um, you probably brought him into your team. So, or her into your team. What are you doing if they can't get on the pitch? And you definitely can't call yourself, a player developer. Um, and at some point, it's like this big Venn diagram where eventually at some point you'll land on, probably every weekend you might land on a slightly different point. But let's go out, let's win. But I still want Rio to go 1v1 against people. I still want to make that judgment. I still want the goalkeeper to come for more corners today than he did 6 months ago. You know what I mean? And we'll cover that, because ultimately, and I've seen it, and there's such great moments. Ultimately, the keeper comes out and catches the fucking thing. Do you know what I mean? And
yeah,
and you go,
yeah.
you know
There
what I
it
mean?
is.
You go, that
Yeah,
that's your, okay. I conceded a goal from playing out from the back, but overall, I'm better for it. That is one of those things. He comes and flaps, and you go, oh my goodness! But then there's a moment. You know what I mean? And that goalkeeper remembers you forever because you've just facilitate that happening. Um, I'm not going to land in any of those corners that you mentioned earlier. I'm going to just plot it so that you can do all of those things. Please don't think development is anti-result. It's just not. Like, that's not how it works. We can hold these two things together at the same time without a problem. If it is a build from the back thing, if one of your centre backs is really good at playing out from the back and breaking lines or something, and it goes wrong, that's that's the moment. That's just one of those things. That's just football. He
yeah,
could stick it down the pitch and they could turn the ball over and they can go and score anyway. Do you know what I mean?
yeah,
But you
yeah,
you don't get any of the development with it.
yeah,
So yeah. There's a point there where I feel they all converge.
yeah. Perfect. Thank you, Ray. All right, well, I think brings us probably what will be the final point I reckon on this, and that's really thinking about player reviews then, which you kind of mentioned again about having this criteria and that. Like, what's your views on kind of player review documents and that kind of thing where you assess a player at the end of the season? We've had them before. I've created some over the years, and we've used them some seasons, not other seasons. And I think sometimes they land okay, other times they don't land very well, and always well intended. But if you're going to develop a player and you're going to set maybe some objectives and some targets potentially, and you're going to look at that, should there be a review document at the end that you kind of go and visit again? And if so, how could that look to be most effective in supporting individual player development? And I like your point about saying actually it's maybe more about a role than it is about a list of criteria potentially. But what's your views around that more broadly?
Yeah, look, if we're going down the simplistic route, the 1 to 4, then a review document becomes a 4 sentence document, doesn't it? Which it doesn't seem like such a monster anymore. And now if you were to do 3 or 4 of them across the season, maybe you've got 3 or 4 of them just to keep you know in a booklet or on an online form or whatever it is, just to maintain the record of it. There's not too many important things that don't get written down, right? I would say as well. And we can have the conversations in between, but I think when you put pen to paper, it kind of commits people to different things.
Yeah,
That's my thought on that. And at the end of it, the this will vary from coach to coach. At the end of it, your role then becomes about, if you're going to review them, it's got to be against those things. Do you know what I mean? It
yeah,
shouldn't be on the final day. Well, actually, your crossing this year has been horrific, and you know what I mean. And suddenly something out of the blue. We either hone in and we drive these things, and let them become the point of reference. Maybe you want to then go next season. I would like, because you were a centre back and now you've ended up playing right wing or whatever it is. So we need to do things slightly differently. So let's um, let's change it up slightly without losing everything. And the thing is, I shouldn't use those words, losing everything, because there's no loss here. Like, the worst version of this Scott is a better player.
yeah,
The
yeah.
the very like, if
Yeah,
you have the
because there's eyes on it,
conversation,
right? You're at least talking about it, aren't you? There's a conversation, so there's got to be something positive out of that.
if you have a conversation at the start of the season, right, and all the wheels come off and you don't get back to it, that conversation was still had, and
Yeah,
it will still be circling around. However strong, now it would need some retrieval going on, but however strong, like you've definitely not lost anything by having that. But if you can maintain it, if you talk about winning and having a better team, if you have 16 players that are naturally improving, because that's what football does to most, and deliberately improving, even incrementally. If you have 16 of them going on all the time, and then you've got them going on 3 or 4 times per player, suddenly, you would expect to be better overall.
yeah,
Now, it's not, football is not that logical and far more dynamic than that, but
definitely
it's
not.
true. And form goes up and down, confidence weighs in, and all that kind of stuff. But
Well,
um,
that's another good point because I think when we've used references in this conversation, it's been quite technical stuff, finishing or doing that. But actually, when you're developing the players, there's psychological in there, isn't there? There's all these other parts to it as well. So I guess we have to think about that. Well, you have to think about it, definitely, and that's not always as easy to measure, is it? Someone's confidence, for example, or their desire to compete or something. It's not as tangible and as numerically metrical to measure as maybe if you are you getting more shots off in a game kind of thing. But that's important too, right? To make sure we're looking at the whole player.
for sure. And look, I'm not. If we start to if we start to say this must go in, we've got a problem, because everything must go in. Now we've got to have a super strength and an area for development for each corner, right? And we still haven't talked. We talked about super strength and technical as weakness and technical, but I've got another technical thing, and suddenly now you've got 10 or 12 things, and there you've got a problem. Maybe the biggest area for development for a player might be a confidence thing, right? And you end up having a conversation around what does a confident Scot look like? And maybe you have those conversations instead. Maybe, and we all have players where their super strength is their mentality, and you put things in around, I don't know, their leadership. I remember, and this was an area for development, to be fair, but a player came to me talking about wanting to be a better leader and communicator. So we put him in charge of set plays. He was 18, so, he had a body of work behind him. But it was okay. Set plays are are your thing. Do you know what I mean? When something needs setting up or breaking down or whatever the case may be, you're the one that we're going to turn to for the answers, and just to it gives them a purpose rather than saying talk more or
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
we do that, don't we? Let's be honest.
Yeah, absolutely. Right, that's
Um,
been awesome. Look, thank you so much. What I'd say from my side is what I've learned from this conversation is that actually, as obvious as it sounds, player development is a fundamental part of what we have to do. And, making sure I'm balancing that along with the team stuff and probably actually making sure I'm leaning more on player development than team development because that fixes the team in many, or it fixes, but that helps the team in many ways. That it actually isn't as hard, if you just do the basics right and have those conversations and put things in place. And I would imagine, and I've done these things before, but it's so easy for them to drift away, isn't it? When they kind of the lights on them again, you kind of almost forget, and you become so obsessed in other areas that you forget about this. But it's important, but and actually it's not that hard to put in there if you just give it a bit of thought and time, and you make the space for it. So I found that really fascinating. Is there anything around player development that we've not mentioned, do you think, or I've not asked about? I mean, there's lots, I'm sure, but
yeah, probably.
specifically, yeah. But anything you think, actually, I wish Scott had asked, yes, I wish we spoke about that just before we kind of move on to what you're doing next and stuff. But I want to wrap it up in a way that I'm not missing anything out.
Yeah, look, specifically like individual development has taken on a bit of its own thing over the last few years, where you have more individual development coaches. You have players that may or may not work away from your training sessions in a different way than street football used to be. So that, again, conversations add those things to the pot as well, don't they? For better or worse. So yeah, look, it's if we were to solve your problem from the start, that would be all my chips on the table. And if you suddenly found yourself far more resourced with people or with time or with tech or whatever it is, then you can go ahead and build on that. There's a wonderful book about to come out by David Epstein, and David Epstein just many years ago wrote the Sports Gene, and it's not about football, but it's all about constraints and how constraints make you creative. And I'm a big fan of coaches giving themselves constraints, i.e., saying, I've got this IDP thing that I'm going to try. I'm going to have 4 of these conversations next season, one pre-season, one whatever, October, one in springtime, one at the end of the season. And I'm just going to put those 3 or 4 things out there with each player. Um, and if you can do that, if you can constrain your job load to include that, I think, I
Yeah.
think you and the players will love it so much more.
Yeah, brilliant. Well, that brings us nicely on to what you're doing at the moment and some things that may be coming up down the road. So, if listeners enjoy this episode, and this wasn't a shameless plug for this, I promise you, this is my idea to talk about this topic. But it just dovetails quite nicely into, I think, some things that you're doing. So, if people want to find out more, do you want to just chat quickly about what it is you got coming up, and if people want to reach out to find out more about that, how they would do that?
Yeah, so at power_Ray on X is your first port of call. So at the end of May. So here's hardcore for you, Scott. 10 p.m. Sunday night, 31st of May, which is 6 a.m. in Japan. Eddie Jones, the Eddie Jones, the rugby Eddie Jones, is coming back to me. And we're not going to talk about, last time we spoke about the professional game, and we spoke about and to elite professional coaches. This time we're going to talk about not necessarily what we spoke about today, but we're going to talk about player development, about how players get better. So the audience will be probably the audience you've got now. So that's over the next couple of days. I'll be setting up links for people to register for that.
That's
Those
live, Ray, is it? That he's on live. Yep. Yep. So he's gonna be up nice and early in Japan to see you.
Yeah. And he's
Yeah.
brilliant.
You know, yeah.
And he doesn't have to do it. We enjoyed. You'll laugh at me now, but you'll know what this feels like. We enjoyed ourselves so much, kind of over and back in the last time around the professional game stuff, that we said, look, the next day we agreed to do something for development coaches, and we might see Eddie Jones as being the winning guy and all that, but he's got such a um, such a smart way and understanding of development, and even if it's a
Yeah.
different sport, it's so relevant. So that is the last Sunday of May. The following week after that, we're going to do a webinar for parent coaches, for new parent coaches, which I think is, there's a gap there, isn't there? For, oh my God, I'm now coaching my kid. Or even if you're only a couple of years in, what do I do? Like, am I easier on them? Am I harder on them? So what I've done is I've got 10 parent coaches who've done it all, who've gone from 8s to 16s or whatever the case may be, and said to them, what would you tell everyone? So we're going to throw that around the room for an hour. So they are two examples of the webinars that you can book on as a one-off or as part of the monthly membership program I do, which has loads of stuff from CPD hours to webinars to courses to books and all that. It's kind of like a one-stop shop for people who like to develop, and probably people listen to the pod, to be fair, because people who listen to the podcast don't square off that hour for coach development, do they? It's kind of in their system.
They want to learn and
Um,
want to get better and want to take on the information. Yeah, exactly that. Yeah.
yeah, you want to do it over and over again. That's
Brilliant, right?
yeah. So all that's coming up, and I probably missed out a couple of things, but
Well, we'll put all the links in the show notes so people can find out all the other stuff as well. But that's great. Like, it's a brilliant topic around player development. I love the parent coach one as well. Being a parent coach and going through that, I think the best thing you can do as a parent coach is try and know what's coming 2 or 3 seasons ahead, because then you can give your players a great journey, because you're not trying to learn as you go all the time, because they have to learn with you then, and that's not always fair on them. But I think that's a brilliant conversation, and I'm sure people will enjoy jumping on that. And I think for us, we'll have a guest on probably next time, or we might do the round table. I'm not sure, but there'll be some good stuff coming up in the next couple of weeks as well. So look forward to that. But thank you very much for today, Ray. It's been a great chat around player development. I really enjoyed that.
likewise, mate. Really good, really good. Thank you.
Top man. This episode was brought to you in association with our friends at Soccer Coach Weekly. Established since 2006, Soccer Coach Weekly is a leading source of inspiration and advice for all grassroots coaches. Join thousands of youth soccer coaches just like you, saving time and effort in their goal of having the most effective, enjoyable and successful coaching journey for them and their players. Thanks for listening. I hope you enjoyed the episode.